For this and next episode, we are going to take a look at two of the best-known paranormal creatures from Korea. Today's subject is Dokkaebi. Dokkaebi is often described as Korean Goblin or Troll because there's certain characters that are in line with those creatures. But of course, one can't say they are exactly the same things. Now, what we, modern public, perceive as tradition often turns out to have much more recent history, invariably within the past century. The word Dokkaebi can be traced back to early Joseon dynasty, and various creatures that could be considered its predecessors are from as far back as to the ancient time. But the contemporary understanding of Dokkaebi is largely rooted in the folklores rewritten to children's fairy tale versions in the 1920s. Folklores tend to bother not so much with defining the detailed looks and coherent characteristics, which was a challenge for modern writers. It was the colonial time then, and probably for that reason, the images of Japanese monster Oni were gradually adopted, and it stayed and was reinforced in various reincarnations of folk tales in the pop culture. Only in the recent decades, scholars started pointing out that the red and blue skin colors, horns on the head, spiky clubs, and animal skin dresses could not be found in traditional description of Dokkaebi. It prompted discussions as what were then true characteristics of Dokkaebi, but it quickly turned out more complicated than initially imagined. Because the word Dokkaebi was often used as a broad term to mean various inexplicable or paranormal apparitions, from shapeless form of strange tremor or unnatural loud noises to free-floating ball of fire. Even when it takes on a humanoid form, it varied from a giant to dwarf, from a woman to child, from obviously deformed and abnormal to almost undetectable and even conventionally good-looking. Yet, if one really has to pick the most commonly accepted and described appearance, a Dokkaebi manifests usually in the form of a big burly man. Some people point out physical prowess was a great asset in the agricultural society, and Dokkaebi's powerful physique and ringing voice signified his superhuman power in abundance. Sometimes the subtly different colors of skin or eyes would give away that he's not a usual human, but often his attire would look pretty normal. Character-wise, a Dokkaebi is best described as a man-child. He's not very bright and almost naive, but loves to have fun and is a big-time prankster. He loves pork, rice wine, and cake made with sorghum, basically very down-to-earth party food. He never really has a malicious intention. He usually hates violence and blood. But because he's not bound to human morality and doesn't think about the potential consequence of his much greater power over humans, sometimes his desire to play and prank can be a big nuisance and even fatal to ordinary humans. Overall, very much like a child before disciplinary education. A Dokkaebi is not a ghost in the sense that he is not from a human spirit. There's no orthodox theory as how he was born to be, but the most common understanding is he can be born out of old everyday objects we use, especially the tools humans handle and touch a lot, like a broomstick or a mortar. As I mentioned in the previous episode about dolls, in the pagan belief in Korea, people believed any objects can take on its own spirit given the right length of time and context, often in the form of accumulated human desire and obsession. Probably because a Dokkaebi is born out of human activity, he seems to love to get attentions from other humans and wants to get involved in human lives. Dokkaebi had a recent surge of interest beyond Korea due to the popular 2016 TV series Guardian, the Lonely and Great God. The Dokkaebi depicted in the modern drama is of course very different from the traditional one, but he does take on some of the characteristics described earlier. Traditional or not, it shows how an old paranormal character can be adopted into a modern pop culture. So, let's meet Dokkaebi through 3 allegedly true modern accounts. The first story depicts the widely accepted Dokkaebi's traditional image as a naughty prankster, but the other 2 depicts Dokkaebi's a bit more complicated relationship to humans. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by host, Anthony. It's a story my grandma told me. Back in 1945, when Korea gained independence from Japan, Grandma was herself but a young girl. She heard one day her parents arguing over an old broomstick made with bush clover of all things. Her dad was saying that they should save everything to survive the hard time. He could just add some fresh bush clover branches and the broom would be as good as new. While her mom was arguing that they'd better throw it away since it was already over 20 years old and could attract Dokkaebi. In the end, Dad won and the broomstick stayed. Days passed just as usual until one snowy winter night. Grandma woke up hearing clashing noises coming from the kitchen. She looked around to find both her mom and dad sitting up. Before she could ask them what was happening, Mom hushed her. "Keep quiet. They shouldn't hear us. Just go back to sleep," Mom said. Being a young girl, Grandma could indeed fall asleep despite all the noises. In the morning, Grandma was shocked to find the kitchen totally messed up, but her mother seemed to know already what it was all about. "No matter. Dokkaebis must have played all night long there. It's natural it's left a mess. Now, take this money and go to the market with Dad and buy some pork," she calmly said. By the time Grandma returned from the market, her mom had managed to tidy up the kitchen, except for the lids of cauldrons that had been folded into squares. These were giant cauldrons almost a meter long diameter, and their lids made with heavy-gauge cast irons were not broken or cracked up, just neatly folded in. Dad just commented everything would be okay should they treat Dokkaebis with plenty of food. So her mom prepared, using the neighbor's kitchen, a table full of dishes as if for a big holiday feast, and set it in the kitchen with a pot full of rice wine. They themselves had just a light dinner and went to bed early with all the doors firmly shut. Next morning, Grandma found in the kitchen all the dishes empty clean, the pot of wine dry, and the lids of the cauldrons unfolded back to its former shape, and one could not see a single crease either. Right that afternoon, her dad burnt off the old broomstick and scattered its ash in the nearby stream, and they never experienced anything such again. This happened to an acquaintance of mine. One day he was having a drink with several friends. One of them was a well-known lover of mountain hiking. Probably because they both had dropped too much, they fell into an argument about the hiking. "I don't give a damn about hiking. What will you do about it, eh?" my acquaintance shouted, and his friend shouted back, "You don't know what you're missing, stupid." In the end, my acquaintance was all triggered, and with a bit of Dutch courage, he made an uncalled-for bet with a mountaineer friend. "I climb one right tomorrow and send you the photo from the top to prove it. F the mountain!" He was so annoyed and was still huffing and puffing all the way back home. Next day, his work, which should usually wrap up by 4 or 5 in the evening, dragged on to 6. Strong-headed, he regardless picked up his backpack as soon as he finished the work and headed up to a mountain nearby. He just assumed he could just follow the trail all the way up and follow the same route back down. Having no prior experience, he didn't know a mountain at night can be a dangerous place even for an experienced hiker. So he followed up the trail what seemed like a significant length of time, but the milepost was telling him the peak was still far off. "Gosh, it's not quite as easy as I thought it would be," he thought, and turned around thinking to try it some other time again. But then he wasn't sure anymore from which trail he had come up to this way. He had thought he just followed a single trail, but apparently there were crossroads one after another. Finally realizing he was in trouble, he turned on the flashlight on the phone and digged his memory as best as he could to find the right way. But no matter how long he walked, he seemed to be back to where he started. "Am I possessed or what?" he thought. He pinched himself and sang out loud to keep himself focused and carried on walking. But the way seemed endless and the phone was running out of juice. Suddenly, he saw a person sitting on the rock farther away. At first he thought it might be another fellow who lost the way, but the closer he got to the person, the clearer he felt something wasn't quite right. Maybe because it was night, but his skin was very dark. There seemed a weird lump on his forehead, and in his hand was what looked like an wooden sword. The person on the rock then turned to look at him and said, "Who are you?" And the voice rang and echoed around like that of a lion. It was overwhelming enough to make his legs give way, so he sat there and exchanged a few words with this strange guy. And only then he noticed that there was a gap between this guy and the rock. He wasn't sitting there, but levitating. He managed to swallow his gasp and excused himself that he'd now better carry on his way back down, and trotted his way. Then he heard the guy's voice saying, "What's the hurry?" right next to him. The guy's face was right next to him. He was startled and looked back, and was shocked to find the guy's body was still on the rock, and it was just his neck that had stretched out to follow him. All his countenance collapsed by then. He dropped on the ground and could just say, The guy said, "Don't get frightened. I'd just like some chat." Are you going to, kill me?" My acquaintance stuttered. The guy laughed out loud and replied, "No, don't you know what a chat means?" There wasn't another choice for my acquaintance. Seeing him sit down there, the strange guy started enthusiastically talking about this and that. My acquaintance says he strangely can't remember for his life any of what the guy said. When the guy finally finished the story, my acquaintance realized he was crying. He saw his watch. It was now near midnight. Now, if you'd excuse me, I really need to go back home now. Which way should I take? Can you tell me? Please. To his plea, the guy, without a word, just pointed his finger to the direction. And indeed, following the direction, my acquaintance could come down the mountain at last. He bowed towards the mountain and expressed his gratitude. That night, he had a dream. He could not see anything, but the guy's voice rang out in the darkness, saying,
"Now all will be well with you."
True to the word, his business became successful, enough for him to subsequently make an early retirement. What was that strange guy? Was it a Dokkaebi from old folklores? Was it really his doing that made my acquaintance's business successful? Who can tell? When I was 8, my family was going through a dark time. The fabric retail business that had been handed down through several generations went bankrupt. Granddad spent days with the drinks and laments for having failed his ancestors before he suddenly passed away in his sleep. Grandma followed him not long after. She practically raised me in her arms and on her back, and I cried day and night for the loss. But my dad, being the man of the family, could not just sit back in all the misfortunes. There was still me, my older sister, and Mom, who was carrying the third child. And we were soon to move out our old home to pay back all the debt left from the business. One day a friend of late Granddad came and tipped Dad that he knew a very cheap and decent house we could move in. The house was in what later has become one of the new towns of Seoul, but it was still more or less out in the empty field at the time. But the house itself was spacious and clean, and above all unbelievably cheap for what it was. A few days later, as we were busy preparing the moving, the Granddad's friend visited once again. He then told Dad the story about the new place over a drink. Apparently, the house was built on Dokkaebi's playground. Dokkaebi would help and make the owner of the house get rich if the owner should serve them well and stay down to earth. But if the owner should turn out to be vain and ungracious, they would chase him away. But even in the first case, the owner could stay to enjoy the good fortune only for a decade. After that, he should move out to leave the place and the chance of fortune to the next owner. The previous owner of our new place turned out to be a womanizer and a gambler as soon as he got some money, and indeed went bankrupt and lost his son before he moved out after only 4 years. All the neighbors whispered among themselves it was all Dokkaebi's doing, said Granddad's friend. My dad just smiled without agreeing or disagreeing with the outlandish story. But my mom soon had a dream in the new place. In the dream, a giant of a man whose face she could not clearly see for some reason just barged into the house and said to Mom,
"Oi, daughter, your luck with fabrics is spent. Start new with food this time, for wearing a rag is miserable, but being hungry is even worse."
And with that, all the doors and windows about the house shut by themselves loudly. Mom told Dad about the dream. He was indeed considering about starting a small restaurant, and just silently welcome the affirmation. Before they could save enough fund to open a restaurant, they first started with selling homemade tofu. Mom would make fresh tofu from the crack of dawn every day, and Dad would take still steaming tofu out to the market. We still used wood fire to cook in the old-fashioned kitchen, and it would have been very tricky to control the fire to cook the bean curd consistently without boiling over or burning. But as if by magic, Mom managed it perfectly day by day, and they were always sold out day by day. It soon became so famous around the local market, and some people even came to visit us to ask for Mom's recipe. After Mom gave birth to my younger brother, Dad finally started the restaurant business. It was a rudimentary arrangement using the outer building of the house, with an open kitchen and outside tables. Regardless, the business took off quickly, and Mom had to hire 3 more hands to run the ever-growing business. The job of caring for the newborn brother was naturally given to my older sister. Despite of Mom's admonition not to go too far off, sister would often go away all day long with a baby on her back. One day I ran into her on my way back from school, carrying the baby brother as usual. She then quietly asked me if I wasn't afraid to go back home. Of what? It was always full of people in and out of the restaurant. She didn't say anything more then. Only years later, when I got older, she said our home was full of ghosts. On the roof were giant hands and feet, but to whom they belonged could she never fully see. Amongst the guests to the restaurant were numerous mop-headed ghosts. They didn't have arms and legs, and would drag their empty sleeves and trains of their clothes and roam all around the house. They would laugh and giggle among themselves, and the louder their laughter got, the more clients came to our restaurant, it seemed. When the night came, an old man with a red nose and a long beard that came down to his belly button would chase them away and lock up the gate. If some of them should protest, he would loudly bellow at them to wait till the morning. So loud the whole house shook, and the ghosts outside screamed. But all the other family members would just brush it off as gusts of wind. I thought my sister was hallucinating when she told me this. She was rather weak and often bedridden with various ailments. Maybe all that was a sign of her natural spiritual sensitivity, and so she alone could see what was going on in the house built on the Dokkaebi's playground. Years passed, and I became a high school student. My family became by then pretty prosperous with the success of the restaurant business, and the starvation and poverty from my childhood became a distant memory. My younger brother grew up big and strong, probably because he was fed and cared well from the early age as the family wealth grew. Everything was going swimmingly, and my mom's only concerns were her youngest occasionally beating up one of his friends, and her oldest still being frail. When I turned 17, Mom had a dream. The same giant guy from the dream 10 years ago appeared again and told her,
"Hey, daughter, it's time to pack up again. You've still got a year left, but must make sure to move out before the year passes. Move away farther outside of Namsan Mountain so that the beggars can't follow you."
And with that, all the doors and windows flung open this time. Mom knew the good time was over, and told Dad about it. but he had a different idea. He insisted to make the most of the last 1 year, because he wanted to open the fabric retail shop again. Maybe he couldn't quite shake off his father's tears as he lamented, "Having ruined the family business, I'm too ashamed to meet my ancestors again in the netherworld." Dad and Mom quarreled constantly over the issue. All I could do was just quietly keeping the side of my desk, pretending to study. A year passed quickly. Dad did open a fabric shop in the market as he insisted, quite big as to replicate the glory of the past. The old family business was said to be the biggest shop in the area. Mom didn't set a foot in the new shop and just focused on running the restaurant. One day, she had yet another dream. The giant man didn't even bother to come in, but just whispered,
"You've missed your time, and your fortune is up. Every penny and every grain of rice you've stored up shall now turn into shit."
His giggle at the end was creepy enough to wake Mom up, drenched in cold sweat. At first, the business seemed running just fine as usual. But my sister got weaker by day and seemed frightened more than ever before. The old man with a long beard had disappeared, she explained, and without him as the night guard, all the ghosts would make noises all around the house all night long that she could not sleep a blink. Sometimes along with the usual mop of ghosts came some black things, and they would nod away the rafter of the house. And the following day, something bad would happen without fail, like somebody getting an accident or the supplies would fail to be delivered. Meanwhile, the discord between Mom and Dad only grew. Mom was especially unhappy with Dad's new shop guzzling away the profit from her restaurant. Into the autumn that year, my sister died. What seemed like a common cold turned out to be an acute pneumonia, and she passed suddenly even before she could leave her last words. Mom bewailed at the funeral, saying in yet another dream some women in blue dress and mopped hair dragged my sister away by the feet, laughing. Mom lashed out at Dad for ignoring the warning signs for his stupid ambition, which had now killed their daughter. Dad refused the accusation, but his stubbornness was to be short-lived when the staff at his fabric shop ran away with all the money and asset. My brother's belated scarlet fever followed, and Mom and Dad finally realized it was no time to argue anymore. They had to run all around to find a new place in the dead of winter, and we managed to finally move out in the following spring. Mom carried on with the restaurant business, but it never reached the level of the peak years. It was nevertheless enough to make ends meet, but they always found it lackluster, having experienced a great success already. I think Dad quietly missed the old Dokkaebi House until the day he died. Now that I'm facing 50 myself, my takeaway from the decade is that there's nothing free in life. The ghosts might have brought us a fortune, but it consequently made my parents blind with their own greed and took away my poor sister. Some may call me small and unambitious, but I'd rather be happy with a fair reward for my own effort and nothing more. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for your listening. I grew up before all the discussion about Dokkaebi true to the tradition, so for a long time, Dokkaebi in my mind was what looks akin to Japanese oni and characters that only exist in children's fairy tales. So I was pleasantly surprised to find these modern accounts about Dokkaebi. Next week, we are meeting another representative figure from traditional paranormal world in Korea, so stay tuned. If you enjoyed my work, please give my video a thumbs up, leave comments, share in other social media, and consider subscribing to my channel. Every like, comment, and subscription mean a lot to this little channel. Thank you. Until the next, stay safe and take care.